Welcome, everyone. Today I am joined by Kevin Carr and Brian Freeland, and they're going to be hosting a chalk talk on the evolving landscape of college and high school sports, the impact of name, image, and likeness, or as we all know it, NIL. Turning it over to you, Brian.
All right. Thank you, Brittany. Again, my name is Brian Freeland. I am the Dean of the School of Health Sciences at American Public University. Very happy to be with you today. Very happy to be talking sports with you. So the title of this is Chalk Talk. We're going to be talking about the NIL. So this type of format, we really want it to be interactive. We think that this is a real relevant relevant subject area right now. And so please use the chat to ask questions, to have conversations, and we would like to include you in that. But the goal here is I'm going to be basically having chalk talk and asking questions to Kevin Carr, who is our industry expert. So Kevin brings 25 years of experience to the sports business and professional development industry. He's an award-winning transition expert, leadership coach, and he is CEO of a company called Pro to CEO, a firm that he founded to support athletes, artists, and organizations in maximizing their careers beyond the field and stage. Pro to CEO helps clients excel in business by guiding the professional transitions and growth. So we're going to jump right in. We're going to jump right into the questions and talk about NIL. It's everywhere. It's in the news daily. There's always something new going on. And so first question I have for you, Kevin, I just want to know your general thoughts around NIL and the impact that it's having on the sports landscape right now.
Sure. Thanks for having me, Brian, and thank you for everybody joining. I'm certainly honored and definitely privileged to be with you today. It's always great to be amongst people who are wanting to excel and talk through and learn from each other about, subject matter. So this is one that's of great interest, I think, to our sports vertical, but also education and academia. It's a nexus of a lot of what we see sport becoming for the foreseeable future. I bring you someone who, like Brian says, a lot of years of experience. My interest getting into sports just was I had an older brother who played with Deion Sanders at Florida State, and before we knew it, within 2 years he was back home. And as a little kid, I'm watching my brother really develop as an athlete, get bigger, stronger, did three sports. He was a shot putter, wrestler, and an offensive lineman, and he got a scholarship to play offensive tackle. But what happened was he got an injury, and when his identity from football fleeted, he struggled on his transition back home. He didn't know how to ask for help, became mentally depressed at school, and ended up back with us. And I was puzzled because I saw someone who worked so hard and put so much time and energy, and his reward was to get his education as well as maybe have a shot at playing college football and getting a getting a degree, and maybe go pro. That didn't happen, and that puzzled and bothered me. So instead of myself, pursuing, because I had was a high school athlete, I decided to say, what is it about this business of sports that I can make a big impact? And I noticed I could possibly help guys like my brother, and that's why I ended up in my first role, really as an advisor for athletes, really to sort of be a vehicle and come up with strategies and solutions to really be helpful to the industry on sort of the human development side. And this is long before kinesiology programs and sports management programs. I had been sort of a early human resources person in sports. So fast forward, I get a chance to work at some pretty good programs, Michigan State, the NBA G League, the NBA itself, and now I have my own firm. It's a 10-year firm. And when I think about now where we are uh, with the advent of NIL, I can tell you, in my humble opinion, I've never seen something coming to the sports landscape that has been such a big disruptor. And I mean, in a way that really has changed everything that we have been doing, everything we know to be sports centric. It's redefining how that is happening at every level, amateur, collegiate, pro, and eventually we will see what it looks like when people retire, having gone through NIL. We're going to be seeing more and more of that. So to me, NIL is possibly in our lifetime the single biggest thing in collegiate sports that we'll be talking about for a very long time in terms of its impact, its reach, what it does to the sport, and what people will sort of be doing at earlier stages of sports. Essentially, I call it now the modern day professionalism of amateurism, and where we will now see everything that's happening at the pro level begin to form and create ecosystems and processes and strategies and tactics, etc., at the amateur level. And how young that will get, we're starting already to see it will be as early as, middle school in some cases. So to me, where it's going to go and where it's going to end up is going to be quite unique, Brian. And I really want this audience to know that, as you all saw it evolve maybe 2, 3 years ago, everything that we were doing back then, that those models have evolved and will continue to be evolving. And we just need to be sort of on our bicycle with NIL, riding along, because it's going to change landscape time after time after time. So just buckle up, sort of like riding a plane, put your seatbelts on, try to find smooth air. I don't know if we're going to find it anytime soon.
Yeah, and if anyone didn't pick up on that, he did say middle school. We're starting to see some of the NIL trickle all the way to middle school. So, I've shared that with some folks recently about high school, and they seem shocked. And so, much less talking about going down to that level. I mean, we're literally talking about 13-year-olds at AAU that are having to make these kinds of decisions. Yeah. So the next thing I want to get your thoughts on, Kevin, is the student athlete experience at the collegiate level or the high school level. It's always been a balance of academics and athletics and all the different things that come with being a student athlete. It's never been easy, but now you're adding these brand building responsibilities. What does that look like, and how has that changed?
Well, I mean, the student athlete experience as we know it was one in which obviously you trade your talent, athletic talent, to come in and compete and get an education. And hopefully you learn some life skills and get trained in an area where if you leave the university and don't go pro in sport, you're at least prepared to go in the world of work as a professional. That model is flipped on its head in some senses. I wouldn't say every level of sport is able to achieve an NIL opportunity, but at the highest level, the most elite level, you're talking about FBS, you're talking about Division 1 football and basketball, and as it spreads out in the other sports, depending where NIL can be very well supported in other sports like baseball and hockey, softball, women's basketball, gymnastics, you're seeing in a different type of student athlete experience now. The first thing, if it's a very elite program, Power 4, remember we're not saying Power 5 anymore because the Pac-10 isn't in play as of yet right now, or rejuvenated itself officially. So the Power 4 experience is one in which now at a collegiate level, the conversation is, what will my NIL arrangement look like? Should I come to this institution as a freshman or as a transfer in the portal? And that's generally the lead, or as things end, or the follow-up, that's most of the conversation. Secondary is generally fit and feel, and how I will work myself into the lineup, and am I started right away? Am I going to, be one and done? Am I going to be 3 years and done, et cetera, depending on the sport? Those are the lead conversations in terms of how I'm able to perform and deliver to possibly even have my NIL opportunity expanded based on meeting incentives and arrangement with my collective and my institution. So now what we're seeing is performance based play is sort of the barometer that is guiding some of these conversations. And now on school visits, it's not just mom and dad, it's NIL agents, and those conversations are being one that turn often into with new personnel on campuses. Those conversations come between agents and GMs now, which we've not seen a whole lot, but we're seeing more and more of campus GMs come into play because of the level of detail and responsibility it would take from a coach who's coaching and trying to win and teach X's and O's and keep a staff together and run as the face of an athletic program at a major university. Now you have to have really a deeper bench. So roles are increasing and expanding to help manage this whole process. So a student athlete can not only go visit a coach and teammates and have experience, they're going to be visiting collectives and visiting with GMs and visiting perhaps with even brands that potentially could be ones in which they're dealing with. So now you're talking about being part student, part brand ambassador, athlete, then having to understand the back end side of it as a business. And that's why a lot of them do have representatives, because it can be a lot for a 19-year-old who now is basically started a small company and is going to have to build out what he or she might not know, but they're going to have a team if they're going to be able to perhaps keep up with all of this. And it's quite daunting now what a high level student athlete is coming in. It's almost very similar to NBA rookies that I used to work with at the NBA, literally coming in with a team that if you're that good and you're at the top programs, that's probably what you're going to be seeing, and that athlete will be having to manage.
Okay, you mentioned brands. And so, I think about now it feels like student athletes have some empowerment, but with that empowerment becomes some challenges. So, how does a young student athlete, whether it's high school or collegiately, at a young age, how do they manage their brands effectively? And what kind of recommendations and advice would you give them?
Well, I mean, it's already started. More than likely, a youngster has a cell phone and probably has an IG and has a Snap account. I know my kids have those, and those are some of the beginning areas in which people, if you're on X or Threads or whatever it is you're using, those are beginning stages of external brand from a social standpoint, social media standpoint. And those are really some of the biggest early drivers of how I would say to anyone here who has a student athlete. I have two of them that I am raising. I have a daughter who's a college student athlete, and I have a son who's a high school student athlete. And part of it is helping them realize that the phones and such are tools, right? And they can be used for education and entertainment and enlightenment, right? So how you decide to use that as a tool, if you use it in a sense to empower you and enlighten people in a positive way, that will help you build a brand, and you keep it where it's not offensive or derogatory or will alienate an audience. A young person doesn't necessarily know that, and that's where a parent or guardian or a coach or someone who is around a young person who is interested in becoming in that area help them through the beginnings of that. Because what you all know is schools go back through and they track and they look at words that you use, and where even if you repost something negative, that can had to a negative brand for you. So it's extremely important that young people and the people around them help put that young person in position by giving them sort of tools and sort of strategies. The second thing I would say is making sure the people around them, the adults and the parents have to get up to speed because a lot of the young kids, even if you're a high school student athlete or like my daughter, I was very integrated in the process of talking to coaches and talking to programs. And with my son, even last night, we were talking to a school last night, and it is part of our responsibility as experienced people to help them navigate that process. Hopefully, they have a structure and a family that is cohesive. Not every kid has a footing where they have two parents or have a parent. They might be staying with a grandparent. They might be staying with a family, a surrogate family, and they don't have all that support. So maybe it's a guidance counselor, maybe it's a coach that can help them through that. But that support system is there, and not to stress them out, but to give them support. Certainly, performance enough is a heavy thing for a student athlete and being a student, and to stress them through this certainly, lends into all kinds of other areas that can create pressures for young people these days, and they're handling pressure really differently than sort of in the past. And the last thing I would say is understand for young people and parents who are involved in NIL is that this is a evolving process, man. It is, you have to stay up on this every 2 months, every 3 months, a quarter. You got to go back and look at legislation and go look at changes. I mean, I think next year, 2025, is probably going to be gigantic sweeping changes with the House settlement finally becoming, sort of in play for 2025. It's really going to change. So you have to be aware of what's going on in that process for that young person so they can navigate. So I wouldn't put it all on the young person, Brian, to develop their brand. They're going to need the support. They're really very young, and everybody really in NIL. And I will say this is very young in this. Even myself, this is only 3 years old, about to go on to 4. So no one's I would say, in-house amazing, know-it-all, super expert in this. I humbly submit that I don't know everything. I am involved in it, and I am learning. I have kids in it. I have, clients as well, and I'm working with schools and other assets, brands. So, but everybody's still learning, in my opinion, and it's totally just scratching the surface, to be quite honest.
Yeah, absolutely. We're learning every single day, as you said. I think you touched on this a little bit, but I want to see if there's a chance to dig a little bit deeper into if you're a student athlete and you're being offered a partnership or a contract. What are some of the biggest challenges? What's that look like?
I think part of it is hopefully that student athlete has an advisor who does have some experience to help them navigate that. More than likely, they probably haven't seen a ton of contracts unless they're elite and they've seen some before they've gotten to high school, excuse me, before they've gotten to college. But for the most part, it's really helping them understand that there is a obligation to this if you do sign this, and you better be very well aware that you can be held liable. And I think they understand, everybody may understand the word sue, but it would take on a different meaning if you really don't adhere to it, of obligation of a contract. So taking it very seriously by having someone there to help them walk them through it. One of the things we are noticing on campuses, there are NIL support people now being hired and walking student athletes along with the collectives, having a representative from that side, as well as even institutions now having an NIL person that can help really demystify that and make sure that student athlete isn't being taken advantage of. But at the end of the day, you certainly have to also know as an athlete that you have to fulfill obligations. So what that means is, in exchange for the opportunity, maybe to be compensated, whether it be through product or be through, certain levels of exposure, or obviously compensation, you would have to in return meet somebody's need. So understanding everything fully. So here's a great example. You may show up with whatever you have on, but if the contract stipulates you need to show up with a certain thing and you show up differently, that puts your contract in jeopardy. That athlete has to know that. And if the athlete doesn't, somebody around them needs to be able to educate them and tell them, hey, you jeopardize or put the contract in lieu because you did not fulfill it, and therefore you won't meet or be fully compensated, or it put our relationship with that brand in jeopardy, and perhaps they may not do another arrangement with you again, or it puts some contention in the deal where it shouldn't have been if an athlete doesn't understand that. So there are all kinds of things that are kind of minor and small that you could do a great job, smile, do whatever you want, sign the autographs. But if you don't show up and meet what it required, even from an optics standpoint, you didn't stay long enough, you didn't say what they asked you to say, those things matter. The other piece is just knowing that contracts at the terminology within it where it can be voided or nullified due to certain things that you do that have nothing to do with you doing the deal. So perhaps an athlete may not know if they have character issues outside of this contract. They put their contract like a code of conduct or behavioral issues that may happen. Maybe they get in a fight somewhere. Maybe it wasn't their fault, but it caused so much attention that now the deal, the brand may call and question, hey, we may not want to do this or carry this any further. So knowing what the requirements of you from an even behavior standpoint away from the deal is important for athletes to understand, and the people who are advising them to make sure they're well aware of that too.
Yeah, it's so interesting because the things you described are what we typically see from the young professional athlete and some of the learning lessons that we see them go through. So it'll be interesting to see if NIL at a younger age will help prepare these athletes for that when they become professionally, they will already have gone through it. Or if they do make mistakes, is that going to hurt them in their future? And imagine, making that young mistake in high school or early college and impacting your future. So it's going to be really interesting. Let's shift gears just a little bit. You talked about the Power Four earlier. You mentioned the Power Four realignment in college sports has really changed in the past year. And now in the news, starting to hear things such as collective bargaining at the collegiate level. How can we expect, the rights of student athletes to maybe evolve in the future?
Well, we're already seeing organizations form that are asking student athletes to join, even though there's not a collective bargaining issue or a big need yet. But they certainly are organizing and forming and putting the nucleuses of athletes to let them know that they do have rights, and they do have advocacy organizations that will advocate for the athlete to be, fairly compensated. So people, student athletes are already being drawn in. My daughter got an email saying, hey, would you like to join? I'm not going to say the organization, but would you like to join this organization to make sure you're well aware of your rights as a student athlete? This is already happening. So this is the collective bargaining power yet of it being able to move in a way that can help the athlete is yet to be seen. But there are some groups out there. We've seen some university groups. We've seen some actually athletes at Ivy League schools and Big Ten schools come with a sort of collective bargaining group that is saying they have a suit or they'd like to petition more for this versus that. We've seen some sort of evidence that these things will be factors if it gets to a point where it gets a big enough issue. We could see them really be prepared and ready to go into this. And I say this having been someone who's been through several lockouts myself. being the former vice president at the NBA for player programs and being in the midst of two lockouts where we went dark for a short period, and we went dark meaning no work, no play for months, 6 months. That is a game changer. And I can tell you, college sports, think about this. If we were to see the student athletes mobilize and stop play during a season, man, and it was college football, it would send tremendous shockwaves in every way you could imagine. Media rights, you're talking about obviously merchandise that have been prepared and sort of expected to sell and move, deals that were sort of put on ice until this is all worked out. And who's going to be doing the actual talking? You're talking about multiple teams, not like NBA, 30 teams. We're talking about 105 college football teams if they were all to sort of figure out who's the nucleus and who starts this conversation, ends this conversation. It could be quite complex. And then the matter becomes revenues. How do we stay afloat as a athletic department with if we're anticipating revenues to come in during a certain amount of period and it gets to beyond a month? I've seen it where double digit staffs were reduced during a period where a collective bargaining period went extremely dark and there were no conversations about coming together. And at some point, the business had to decide to help, make sure its costs and the business stayed afloat. It decided to cut back its workforce, in the teens. And I saw many well-skilled, many-year employees, and even, 1 year, last person in, first fired, to multi-year 10, 20-year employees leave based on what the organization had to decide who was most, needed if the lockout went long and far. So to me, the collecting bargaining power eventually and collective bargaining agreements is a huge unknown here. And what it could mean is, I'm sort of showing or telling you my experience at the pro level, but I can only imagine at the college level that we wouldn't get here at all because I don't know what it could look like. I can just tell you I did not like the feeling as a professional to know that over periods of time, if this thing went long, lots of people could be displaced. The industry would take years to recover. It puts a bad brand mark on the business as well, and sometimes you lose fans as a result, and they won't come back because they feel like, hey, the athletes and the management and labor. When you look at what we're talking about here, labor would be the athletes, and management would be the schools or institutions or whoever it would be. It might be part collective, etc., because of the pay issue. It as you can tell, it can be quite complex, quite complex. So who knows here? I would just say it's a possibility, and it's one in which we're already seeing some entities form with the notion that they would be there to support and make sure student athletes have fair and equitable treatment and pay um, and exposure and deals on their behalf. So we'll see in this space. We don't know yet though.
Wow. A work stoppage, similar to a lockout at collegiate sports, that would be that would be very interesting. So with the NIL in general, what has the influence been on recruiting and team dynamics? For instance, athletes maybe making their choices, based on NIL opportunities and just the types of resources that they go into the recruiting.
Yeah, I mean, I think and great question, by the way. I mean, we're already hearing the athletes making more money than coaches. So that's a dynamic that, certainly has sort of become a concern. Athletes making money way more than others, and what does that dynamic? So what that calls for is what we would call at the pro level roster management. And what that means is you're going to see GM's sort of role have to be to do analytics and research around what the market value is, to your to the marketplace of sports, and to make sure that they set and adjust rosters accordingly, because you could have all kinds of mayhem in your football team if somebody's way up here and somebody is down here, which we're seeing. And what does that do to play? What does that do to the dynamics of a team that certainly was built based on sort of its ability to fund enough of the great players so it can compete now in a market where NIL is now a huge issue. You're seeing also the issue of, what does it mean for collegiate teams to have a GM that certainly has to now sort of advise coaches on what they can and possibly offer in between working with the collective, and what needs to be sort of there in order for them to acquire the skill set and talent of an athlete. That whole dynamic really never existed. And now we're seeing, the whole thing around colleges and universities are going to have to deal with roster management. They're going to have to deal with salary caps. They're going to have to deal with, potentially athletes and agents, and them using, all kinds of tactics to increase athletes' performance and incentives for pay. So we're going to see a huge sort of different way in which college operates and will have to operate going forward in order for it to maintain where it is and where it needs to go to create the stability. Right now, it's just so unstable as to what's going to play out and what's going to work well. But I do see the need for, management of rosters, management of what the level of pay needs to be. It could break a department. I'm worried about departments looking at the concern of how are we going to meet this projected 22 up to 22 million that Division One Power Four schools are going to each sort of have to come up with and distribute. This is a real concern, and I don't know. Some programs we know can do it, but for majority, it's going to be quite a daunting task. And who knows what kind of contraction is going to happen internally. We're hearing all kinds of ways in which certain sports might be reduced. And in order for that to be met, certain positions aren't being rehired because they are like contracting to save money as of now, and anticipating of being able to reach the revenue levels that they have to be ready for next year. So there's so much I can say that we're seeing and hearing that it literally is mind-boggling right now.
Yeah, mind-boggling is a good word when we're talking salary caps, incentives, some of these words around college sports, and you led into the different positions. You mentioned it briefly earlier. One thing that I found very interesting, it just kind of took me by surprise. I'm literally driving down the road one day, and on Sports Talk, they mentioned that Alabama University football team hired a brand new general manager. And then the famous Woj from the NBA is now the general manager for St. Bonaventure's men's basketball team. Elaborate a little bit more about that position and how we're seeing that trend.
Yeah, you know what? I was sad to see Woj go. I got interviewed by him back in the day, and he's risen to such a high level and expertise, and become sort of like the go-to for sports information. But listen, I actually believe it's very much needed. There's just too much going on for a one football coach and assistant coaches to be able to manage that. This person is going to have to obviously be, equipped to deal with multiple facets that have less to do with blocking and tackling, more with the financing and people management, and administration and, the data analysis and qualitative sort of performance measures that we are seeing at NBA teams. I actually had a friend who had left the NBA, and he says, "Do you think I need to make a play to be a college basketball GM?" I said, "Without a doubt, there are going to be jobs here." And lo and behold, he's been asked to be considered for one. So I mean, we're seeing even roles that the director of basketball operations now are taking on nuances of being that and managing NIL, which means that is already sort of formatting in the space of sort of someone hybriding skills that really require eventually, if the program, depending on its size and what it's able to do, if you're talking sort of true blue blood programs that have been around like the Dukes and such, they had the first GM in college basketball. And now, she's set, really a trend for what we see programs are doing now. So I think the GM piece is here to stay. I think it's needed. I think it allows programs to sort of navigate this with a little bit more expertise. Again, I caution though that there are very few people who are skilled in this space. So it's going to be a lot of, I think, challenges on how good and skilled somebody is, because again, NIL is young. These positions are not even, 5 years old here. So we're going to see a lot of, I think, potential uh, challenges in the space of who's doing it well and who's not. And, the salaries, as you mentioned, are huge in some senses in certain schools because they put a precedent on it. And in other places, it's an add-on of tons of responsibility. So there's just a huge dynamic here yet, and it's not defined. Years ago when I was in college athletics, the hot position was the compliance officer, right? And then, it became executive, deputy AD and such like that. And then senior women's administrator. Like there are like this is that period within NIL where I believe new positions and new lanes of business are totally going to be created, which we're seeing all over the place. So the GM role is one of many. I think there'll probably be some, sort of lower level positions that are going to be created. I think there'll be an NIL person who manages deals at every school. We recently visited a campus and we met with that person to help negotiate around an athlete that we felt needed more help from the school to leverage a brand positioning that he was very strong in. And we sort of work with the NIL person to help them see that there was opportunity here for the student athlete. And he's well positioned to be a brand ambassador in that space should it come to fruition. It'll take a little while, but there are opportunities like that materializing right before our eyes. So the GM is one of many roles I think that might end up evolving. Who knows? The industry could hurry up and grow up fast and then have to contract some as well because people may have built the house before the house truly needed all these things and then realize it has to downsize some. So who knows right now, but we are seeing that area is one that's being talked about and seen as probably the most intriguing of all, particularly in some of the larger schools because of the salaries that it is commanding is quite huge.
Yeah, absolutely. We've talked a lot about individual, the athlete, the student athlete side. We got into potential roles, the GM and how things are changing. I'd like to talk about coaches.
Mhm.
I think it kind of started nationally, at least for me. Jay Wright, University of Villanova, men's basketball coach. There were discussions that maybe the NIL perhaps had something to do with his retirement. And then it was Nick Saban, college football coach at Alabama.
Who I've worked with.
I got to admit, personally, doesn't matter here, but neither one of those bothered me a whole lot. But this last one, 22 days ago, has torn me up. And that is my favorite college coach ever, is Tony Bennett from University of Virginia, decided to step down 21 days before they tipped off. And during his press conference, there was a lot of discussion about NIL. So yeah, I'd like to hear your thoughts on the complexities, how this is really impacted coaches and how that role changes. And one of the things Coach Bennett said that I thought was so interesting is he just didn't feel like he was the right person anymore. And he alluded to the change of, college sports landscape.
Yeah. This new era of sports isn't going to be for everybody. And I think the traditional, as they call old school coach who truly believes in coaching to really get the best out of a young man or woman, and I'll see how they perform without all of these other things that has to be done, at the collegiate level as we see it now, those days are gone. So now a coach has to really have a flexible sense of how nuances of this new NIL has creeped into their business and creeped into their responsibility of dealing with talent in terms of the student athlete, their talent in terms of their coaches, their expectations to the corporate side and brands and entities. There's like 4 or 5 more tentacles that have joined in their regular job that it was already super pressure filled, that now who has really the patience for that when you've been doing a job where you have national championship caliber coaches who won multiple championships, saying, you know what, I've seen it all, but I don't know if I want to deal with this. And maybe some of them are saying, I'm good. I've won this right here. This is going to be for somebody else, and I'm okay with that because of what this brings. It just may not sit with them well enough to have to deal with the 18-year-old that's saying, now I want this and incentives if I do that. And you have to actually listen to that and give them, and you don't even know down first if they are able to deliver on that, but you now have to deal with that, and it becomes part of your job. And how many times do that caliber coach, they may not want to go through that. So I totally understand, the complexities of what it means for today's coaches to say, now I've got to deal with players, agents, brands, people who are saying we have to be like this in order to now do what we were always doing, just added responsibility. So I'm concerned that some of our best coaches are leaving early, or, leaving at a period where maybe now it puts a challenge to these newer coaches where they have to incorporate a ton of other expertise that has very little to do with the game, and become more business savvy and more equipped to deal with sort of the negotiation side and being able to work out deal making before even somebody gets there. And imagine doing a recruiting visit that starts years in advance, already talking to a 16-year-old as a coach that we believe we might, we're hearing numbers and certain aspects and, starting to hit towards millions for incoming athletes. And that's quite daunting. And knowing that a coach himself at certain programs may have that equivalent of a salary where they're knowing these athletes are getting paid more than their coaches who are working harder and longer and putting in so much time. So it's a complex one. I'm concerned. We're literally seeing the hamster wheel of the patience of coaches literally change, and there are some coaches getting off. And I do think for some it's just not their time anymore to deal with this. So potentially maybe we'll see less and less of that as this becomes more commonplace. And maybe some of the newer coaches will understand it just comes with the territory now. Now they have to really deal with it. So
Yeah, it's definitely honestly not what they signed up for in some respects. It's a
no,
big game changer for them.
yeah.
I want to get back to the athlete, but it was something that Coach Bennett mentioned in his exit press conference that
Mhm.
really got me thinking. He seemed really, really concerned with the future of the mental health challenges with
Mhm.
athletes because of NIL. And he mentioned, I don't know if he alluded to or mentioned, but it seemed like thinking about young athletes being next to each other and maybe there's friction because one athlete has a better deal, is making more money from NIL than someone else, but maybe they're outperforming that person. What do you think about mental health concerns around the NIL with student athletes as we continue down this road?
Well, what I'm concerned about, Brian, is too much, too fast and too early. And I think when people sometimes are not prepared for that, it does add a level of stress. And what if that young person in front of thousands of people can't deliver week after week in their performance? He was expected or she was expected to be this prodigy and they tank, and it's because of the stress. I can remember being at the NBA. This guy was drafted extremely high, and he played on the team, and they put so much pressure. He broke out in hives, and it became a really, really concern of how do we get this young man at his young age and the others around him to actually support him and not really, create the stress. And it took him years to kind of come out of that. He ended up having a successful career, but this is what you're alluding to, that not everybody is built for this either. Yeah, you can be rewarded and given, a certain level of exposure. And if you're sort of not built for it, you can go inward and recluse, and it could be very detrimental to that athlete. We've seen some just not do well when they had to, and they turn to other things, and hopefully it doesn't cause them to go off and really hurt their careers. But I would agree that the mental health piece is actually, in this generation, one in which people are talking about, and they are teams and departments at some of the schools that we've worked with. We've seen entire teams be constructed of mental health professionals to help deal with the modern day pressures of being a student athlete and to recover. Let's say they have an injury and all this pressure is expected of them, and they never really quite get back. And they have to deal with that day in and day out, hearing it from fans and hearing it from the media, hearing it maybe even from their own family and friends. That could be quite a daunting piece for a 19, 20, 21-year old to have to navigate through. So I feel, Coach Bennett's statement that, I've seen it in my lifetime at the pro level, and feeling for some of these student athletes now that are trickling at the college level the same levels of exposure because of social media, and the power of media is so much bigger, and it is so much more expansive that you make a mistake, everybody in the world knows. And how you recover from it, if you don't recover from it fast enough or get back, people really put a lot of undue pressure. And, these are human beings. These are often young people. Think about when you were 18, 19, we made mistakes, and even on campus or, in our own homes, you feel the stress. Imagine it amplified for an entire university community
Yeah.
and a whole nation of fans, and you're part of that. So I do worry about, hopefully there are systems of support, and like I said, like my own brother, you know, will the athlete know how to ask for help? Will the system be intuitive enough to offer and be there to support them? And I think that's what, you know, certain coaches are saying, like, I don't know if I want to be part of
Yeah.
that, and worry even about, is my kid going to be whole if this thing doesn't go well for him or her? That's a great question. It's a concern of me as a parent of an
Yeah,
athlete, sure to help my daughter, to have performed well in her meets and such. So yeah, I'm totally.
absolutely. So, we've talked a lot about that 18, 19, 20-year-old. We talked about college coaches. I think it's just amplified, but I want to hear some of your thoughts on the high school level. So if this is happening at the college level, then and it's starting to gravitate to high school, obviously not quite to that level yet, but probably in some places that we're unaware of. How are coaches going to handle that? How are athletes going to handle that at an even younger age?
You know what I found fascinating? One of the things coaches, even when you talk about Tony Bennett leaving, I don't know if it might even dissuade some amateur coaches who are just coaching at a competitive travel ball level. I ran into a coach who told me that one of the parents of a very high level player for NADA a boys team, but a girls team said that in order to play this year for a team in AAU, or other league or et cetera in a youth league, that um, student athlete was asking for a potential fee. We're talking, at an amateur level. So it's literally starting to happen where even to compete at an amateur, level for basketball, high school, or that level, that there's talk about, having to pay for play. And we've not seen a lot of that, but we're starting to see it not only in boys basketball, girls basketball. So to me, it's really indicative of, the high school market now trying to now up its game in a sense of what can I, command for my talent. My talent is, some people might say as a player that their talent's above the rest of the others. So why wait for college? I'm going to ask for it now. And potentially, maybe they can get it, maybe not. Maybe it comes through some of the shoe company programs where, hey, we're going to go play over here because they provide this for us versus what you can't provide. We're seeing some of that. And if that's the case, sometimes a kid can command a entire company like a shoe company to fund a team that is built around a kid, to make sure that that kid begins to get the exposure for a product that company wants that kid that early, that they're willing to sponsor a team with that kid on it, built around the rest of the teammates are built around that kid. So it's really, really interesting how some of this stuff is playing out. And it wasn't like this, just short a couple of years ago. So, what the impact of it will do to young amateur athletes who might now have this anticipation or expectation that at every level they play, they won't play unless they're incentivized. And I think that's where some of the coaches are saying, well, what about, and the purists, hey, what about love for the game? What about the ability to challenge yourself and to learn how to compete? The ability to win and lose with grace and sportsmanship. What about not being good this year, but going in the off season and putting all that work and coming back and seeing performance and learning the game and learning how to play without having to be given a whole lot of upside? I think we're losing that. And I don't know if people are realizing that even that those qualities are good qualities to have. I could be subjective when I say that, but I do think there's something to be said about grit and fortitude and determination and, learning how to, skill yourself up and not having to be told or had to be paid, at such an early stage in order to do these things. It's almost, mind-boggling that we're even talking about that, but we are.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So this is a little bit of a shift here, but one thing that's been really interesting with the NIL is from the video gaming industry in collegiate sports. So EA Sports produced college football game, NCAA, and believe in 2014 was their last version. We've gone 11 years without the game. There's a whole whole rationale behind that, and Ed O'Bannon and stuff like that that kind of started it. But it's back. It's back. It's college football 2025. The football game is back thanks to the NIL. What kind of impact has that had on the NIL, college sports, student athletes, and what about the potential of video games really helping athletes build their brand? What are your thoughts around this?
No, it's really real. We actually have a client who showed me himself playing in the video game and it was totally enthralled by it. He just was blown away, couldn't believe he was in the video, couldn't believe. Now, he didn't like his likeness. He thought they were off. He said they got to work on that.
Wanted a higher number, I'm sure.
Yeah, yeah, they want to work on the actual physical graphics, but overall, a game like that can galvanize the entire industry, and the numbers I hear on are astronomical. We actually, in my household, didn't have a video game or upgraded one for quite a bit. When my son heard this was coming out, he literally went nuts and had to basically have it, and we're very much not a video gaming have to have the latest this and that, but I'm telling you, it has created quite a frenzy in the marketplace to see what the video games can do too, because they've gotten so good with the technology, and I would say the development of the aspects of what the nuances of the games can do as opposed to what it could do years ago. It's night and day. So from a standpoint of brand engagement, from a standpoint of the technology, and the standpoint of how you can play the game, you can play literally anybody in the world, and you can play. Amateurs can play very famous celebrities. Like, listen, like to me, you can actually play against a college football player and play against his team. Like those things make this period in which the gaming piece and you guys are very brilliant by having a esports piece that I would say would allow people to advance the profession of it. I just see this going even further with now knowing that NIL is part of it and athletes are able to be compensated because they're in the game. I think it's going to be something that's not going to go away now, and it's going to be a part of the infrastructure, or I would say landscape, of how a game will add another life and a iteration of how we look at, monetization and optimization of opportunities in this brand space and collaborative efforts with athletes in gaming and the industry. Who knows what's going to come out of this? I imagine somebody somewhere is figuring out a new way to do gamification with athletes and college athletes. Who's to say an athlete won't come up with their own version and create some kind of way to do it differently than we've ever seen? Those things to remain to be seen, but I would say the industry itself is really gotten a pretty big shot in the arm bringing that game back. I will say that, and it's as when we visit with our clients, they talk about how unique it is to see themselves in that.
Yeah, absolutely. And what I wish we could all, everybody on this call, if we could all work together, let's figure this out and let's get college basketball back, please. But Kevin, one of the reasons why I asked you that question, and I have one more related to esports, is because for the audience, we're actually speaking to one of our industry advisory council members. Kevin's been with us for I think a little over 15 years. working with our sports management, sports and health sciences departments. And he was one of the originators many years ago that said, hey, esports is moving, esports is changing. Is that the type of area you want to get into? And so he has some experience there. It's been really be helpful and kind of laid the foundation for us starting an esports degree, an esports club, and getting started at APUS. So I'm always thankful for that. So I think there's some similarities. Esports really took off and growing at the collegiate level. Was it considered a sport or not? Was some controversy early on, how it was treated, regulations, there weren't any. Sounds like a lot of similarities to NIL in some ways. The fact that we're making the rules as we speak. Do you see some similarities there?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, I don't think NIL's at the point where they're sort of right sizing itself. Yeah, I think, you're seeing a lot of the things that are passing through the NCAA without as much contention. They used to fight tooth and nail a lot. Now you're hearing a lot of stuff just being approved. So I do think NIL's impact right now is it's moving itself forward. Um, Honestly, I do think there's at some point, it's almost like a stock market or a housing market back in '07. It had to right size itself. It had to adjust and kind of come back down. So I do think, at some point we'll see some levels of this be sort of adjusted the right way. And who knows what that will actually mean. Even from a representation, there is no legislation that says you as a parent can't go and represent your son or daughter and create a deal and you have no experience. It's just yes,
Yeah.
you're dad, you're looking out for your son and you want the best, or as a mom, you want the best for your daughter. In other industries on the pro level, it is you have to be licensed and you have to be certified by a union. That is not anywhere, that's not even being touched right now
Yeah.
in IL. And that could be some of the frustration of coaches. And when people are coming out of the woodwork saying, we want this, we want that. And, when you're dealing with someone who doesn't understand the levels of years of like of a very professional lies, collegiate organization that's done a really good job with brand and reputation management. And then you have people kind of just coming at you entirely different than when someone who's sort of been a professional in this space. It can really cause friction in an industry, and I think that's what we're seeing
Yeah.
because there's just really no guardrails yet. There's no one saying a student athlete can't spend through every single dollar that they
Yeah.
get. No one's put any guardrails on that. Like, what does that mean later? Well, you know what that means. There's going to be some major challenges around, athletes having maybe some tax liabilities that we probably are, and we just haven't heard them. But
Yeah.
that's what I feel like this industry sort of is going to have to go to, where we're going to have to sort of see it sort of adjust itself to make it better.
Mhm.
And if that happens, I mean, we know that at the NCAA level, they are trying to get an antitrust where all the states come together and decide on what is a fair way to do this. And, we know Congress has yet to sort of put a response that would create a uniformity to it yet. I,
Mhm.
it may come, but it's extremely complex and challenging. And right now, I don't think anybody wants to be the person that put the total kibosh on NIL. They probably would not get a second or third term, maybe not. But I do think at some point, for the welfare of the athletes, and I'm speaking from someone who has dealt and seen athletes lose hundreds of millions, not even a million,
Yeah.
hundreds of millions. I do think there needs to be some levels of I would say, deferred compensation strategy where there are adequate allotments. We know as professionals, and we see in this industry young people getting money very early, like a child actor, and with that comes someone safeguarding, say, hey, we're going to put this away so you have something for your future. And I do not hear that as much, but if there were some things that I thought could be very helpful to the industry, I would like to see some levels of trust, or some level, if you get a year, 2 years, you're not in the portal transferring all the time. There's more ways for you to acquire
Yeah.
level of, a degree completion allows you to get more or something, or we put something on the back end when you graduate to make sure that there's really not so much transition going on with young people when it doesn't work out. Oh, I'm just going to get a portal. I'm just going to leave.
Yep.
That's what we're seeing, and I think there's something to be said when you learn how to stay and you learn how to work through. I don't want anybody to stay somewhere where they don't feel wanted, but I do
Yeah.
see and sense that there's a lot of movement just because you can, and there is some value to learning how to fight and work through conflict and resolve and work your way up and earn something. I think we're losing a little bit of that
Yeah.
when we just have, the ability to just pick up and leave, in a sense of the word.
Great point. And I like that you mentioned, young celebrities. I've often thought it reminds me of, you hear stories or read stories about a young actor or actress or a young musician or a young band that kind of goes through some of those trials. Well, Kevin, we're almost out of time. I wanted to leave time. I didn't leave much time, but I wanted to leave some time. If anyone else had any questions, I don't see anything in the chat, but you guys are more than welcome. We have just a couple more minutes of Kevin's time here.
Certainly.
And I tell you, the one thing I wanted to throw that out there. So if anybody puts anything in the chat, we'll ask it. But Kevin, if you could do this maybe in 60 or 90 seconds. When you and I talked recently, one of my favorite parts, something that was eye-opening for me, was I just hear a lot of negative. I hear a lot of fans frustrated when Tony Bennett left, or the player decided, the quarterback for UNLV decided not to play. And I read some things on social media. People are frustrated, blaming everything on the NIL. And you see, sometimes there's just negative vibe if you're a fan. But can you just talk real brief about the positive aspects?
Yeah, I would love to. I actually talked to somebody at a major, Big Ten school probably on Monday, and they said NIL's, just the worst. And I do think there's some aspects of it that certainly need to be sort of re-engineered and considered. How can we do this differently? But from my standpoint, I don't think we've done a good job yet at how NIL actually can help really put a athlete who is with the right mindset. And I think we just have not been able to really get to that once we can help a student athlete develop the mindset that you need. And what I mean by that is this: the mental intelligence that comes with knowing, okay, I'm going to get a degree here if I stay long enough. The other part is I get to compete and have a great athletic experience. Hopefully, if everything goes well, and don't get hurt or lots of changes in coaches or etc. And then the other aspect is that I believe NIL brings a capacity and a sort of indirect interest to learn business. And I think the business skills of the art of negotiation, the ability of understanding contractual obligations, partnerships, human resource management, brand management, uh, putting in the ability to understand a marketing deal and looking at how do you create partnerships and community engagement, all those things. If you think about, can that help somebody later on in life look at their first property and understand the nuances of a contract, have seen money come into account, see money set aside for them to do deals and things of that nature. That's here now. And if we can begin to sort of help our young people wrap their head around, if you manage it well and you understand it well, this is a great professional development opportunity to help you prepare yourself for life. And I think we're not really speaking to that aspect at all. I work with a student athlete who's gotten every single NIL dollar he's made, he's not spent it because the collegiate scholarship he got covers everything else. And he was gifted by his parents who have a very good situation, and they gave him a used car to go to college. So he didn't buy a car either. So when you think about how he may leave school, he's an anomaly. So I don't argue with anybody who's saying, well, he's one of a one. I actually know several who are like this. So to me, I feel like we are looking at it one way, but I want NIL to be also looked at that what it can do. We saw a really sort of mid-major FAU team years ago have NIL brought to its team, and this team was able to help its uh, career and family go and see them play at the national championship because those kids stayed together longer. They realized they could do something special. Their NIL opportunities opened up. They were able to do not only help their families but help themselves. And some of them are now, either playing pro or in the world of work, and they have some levels of financial wherewithal because they learned how to use NIL to their advantage. So to me, I know people are hearing the negative, and what do we hear about negative? It's 100 times more powerful than the positive, but I'm here to tell you there are some very positive things that can happen as a result of NIL. And that's the kind of client we look for. We don't always take everybody on my end who isn't thinking that this could be a leg up in a business sense for them professionally. I just ask that everybody to sort of take a objective look, like what can it do? It can actually help some young people change the trajectory of their life if they don't go pro, which is very highly likely. There are no more pro positions that the NFL created, or NBA, or Major League Soccer or baseball, because NIL is here. It's the same amount of teams. So really, NIL has created an economic opportunity for some that if they regulate it and manage it well, it actually could give them a pretty decent head start in life. I know if I would have went to college and left with some money in my pocket, I think I could have gotten a maybe a little bit better start. That could be argued, but I do think there are some positive things that are coming that just really have not gotten to the level of some of the things that we are hearing with the challenges.
Yeah, I hope that gets added to the conversation as this continues. I really appreciate your perspective. Thank you. Thank you for your time. Enjoyed the conversation, your expertise. Thanks for everybody for joining. I hope you took something away from it. I know that I certainly have. So Kevin, thank you for being here. Thanks to everyone. And yeah, we'll see you at another session somewhere. Thanks a lot.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Bye, everyone.